It's 5 to 7. He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb.
Just a little bit of Jim Delbridge here. Welcome to Islands at War with me, Keith Pengelly, and also, of course...
Nick Lahire. Morning, Keith.
Morning, Nick. It's not 5 to 7. It's a little bit later than that, but it is Sunday morning that we're recording. Drizzly and atmospheric outside, let's say. We're in April 1943. We have got a host of things, lots of different subjects. Sure, it will keep you glued to the podcast. And, Nick, I'm going to ask you to kick off with Mr. Mollett and wirelesses in Jersey.
You might remember that we talked about Ord last month, saying that he thought that perhaps some people have been taking money for dobbing in people along the Fort Road for having radios, etc., and not declaring them. Well, I'm not so sure that that was right. This just seems to have been a general crackdown by the Feldkommandantur. Now, they were worried because the whole thing was undermining their authority, and they'd seen that from the start and were not very keen on banning something that was relatively harmless, wouldn't have gained any traction, there wouldn't have been as much enthusiasm for spreading the news, etc. But they were forced by the military, because Bantor being the civilian, or rather the section of the military that's dealing with the civilian population rather than more military aspects of it. They were forced, this was going ahead, the radios were being confiscated, so that they'd not been keen anyway. And of course this became undermined by the fact that people were printing news, etc., and sharing it around, so they were typing up newsletters, the likes of Guns and Gasp, etc. And it just doing this sort of thing just undermined the Germans. And it could have been an easy win for them to just have left that alone. You know, people obviously would have known what was going on in the outside world, but of course they wanted to control what people knew.
And of course, they would have been especially keen to do that, the occupying forces, because things were starting to turn against them, weren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what makes me think that perhaps it wasn't so much just people, taking money for informing, and that had led to this massive outbreak of people getting convicted in Guernsey and big search parties going along the likes of the Forest Road and whatever in March, is because in March 1943, Ralph Mollett, who's the secretary to the bailiff in Jersey, he recorded that there'd been some arrests, etc., for radios. When we get to the 9th of April, almost a month after those arrests, there's 16 persons on trial, he records. And the sentences ranging from 2 weeks to 4 years. Now, we'll come to why that was in a moment, because that's obviously a very wide-ranging gambit of sentences.
Yes, it is. And I was quite amazed at the shortness and then the length of some. Yeah.
Yeah, there's reasons for that. So this case was basically, it started when Joseph Tierney, who was living in Cheapside in St Helier in Jersey, who was a member of the network, he was seized right back at the start of March 43. And then a whole raft of arrests, obviously, if they ended up with 16 people on trial, followed. Now, amongst them was Canon Koyu, who was a Guernseyman who'd retired to Jersey because that's where his wife was from. He'd been educated at Elizabeth College and then gone to India and came back to Jersey for his retirement. Now, Koyu was a bit of a pain in the neck. You'll see a recurring theme here. If listeners have listened to all of the episodes, there are several in various churches across the Channel Islands and the Salvation Army, etc., who make a bit of a nuisance of themselves to the Germans and put the Germans in a bit of a difficult position about what they do with them. Now, Koyu had been a bit of a menace as far as the German police were concerned, so they were quite pleased that they had a reason to arrest him. He had a habit of, like many, spreading news at his church services about what was going on outside of the islands. But Koyu went a bit further. It's reported that he actually used to occasionally shout it out when he was cycling down the street and things like that. Not exactly subtle.
No.
So the German, GFP, the German Secret Field Police, were delighted when they could arrest him because he'd been a bit of a pain as far as they were concerned. They carted him off by car on the 12th of March. he managed to get warnings out to a couple of others, Reverend Matthew the Marinell, the rector of St. Helier, and Curate Preston, who were apparently equally involved with spreading the news. And this seems to go, the Reverend Killer, I know, was also involved in certain activities such as this, but that's later on in the war when he gets caught up. Sanders, in his book, talks about there were so many people involved in this network. It was they probably weren't expecting to be caught. They weren't prepared for being arrested, but this was an absolute gift for the interrogators because you've got so many people to choose from and interrogate and try and get them to contradict each other as to who was doing what. It wasn't a surprise that these guys ended up on trial.
No, and indeed, the point which is very well made here is that some of these people entered into this without seemingly never thinking that they would end up being caught, and wouldn't have prepared themselves for any professional interrogation at all. They probably thought, won't happen to me.
Well, exactly, and some of them were quite elderly. Now, I mentioned 16 were on trial. They did arrest and interview far in excess of that. I've seen one report which suggests there were about 50 people that were hauled in and arrested. Now, this case took place behind closed doors, 9th of April, in the lower committee room of the States Building. And the Germans, despite the fact that it was done in secrecy, they appear to have been quite keen to, on just this occasion, give it some semblance of, due process and legality so they could exploit it for propaganda purposes. So certainly in Jersey, this was appears to be the only case where the court made provision for a Jersey-based advocate, Advocate Valpy, to act as the defence counsel. I mean, one advocate for the lot of them, but I suppose it's progress over having nobody representing you from the civilian legal system. So yeah, that was it. It didn't make any difference. Valpy said afterwards that the outcome was. He knew what the outcome was going to be before it even started, and that the court procedure bore no resemblance to the standards required for a fair trial. Guilt was assumed, and all the defence counsel could do was plead in mitigation, which is probably why it was held behind closed doors. There was quite a bit of public exposure, despite it being behind closed doors, and the Germans, if they'd really been going for secrecy, they wouldn't have gone with that. But there were large crowds outside because obviously they didn't know what was going on in the courtroom. Now, we come to what they were up to. These guys were disseminating, or some of them were disseminating anti-German news.
Yeah.
And failing to surrender leaflets.
Which meant that they basically had hid them. That's presumably.
Well, yeah, or they were producing them. And I think it's a bit of both, actually, because Tierney got a 2-year sentence for manufacturing and distributing the leaflets. So that's producing them based on what was on the radio, a bit like Gasp and Guns in Guernsey. And another chap, Arthur Wakeham, he got done for an identical offence. Now, some people, as we say, only got 2 weeks, presumably just because they were, listening to the radio or whatever. But the prison sentences varied. But the Germans had clearly decided, hang on a minute, we've got a few of the people that we view to be troublemakers and perhaps emblematic figures, people that, were respected within the community, the likes of Cannon.
Yeah, so there was a bit of separating the sheep from the goats here and sort of making sure that they had the biggest impact on people that they viewed as being the movers and shakers.
Yeah, so Tierney and Nicole were basically branded right from the start by the Germans as the chief criminals by the German prosecution. I mean, that sounds wholly fair, and they haven't really made their mind up right from the start that you're guilty as charged. So right from the start, they pushed for the fact that these two were basically, they were troublemakers and they were the chief criminals involved in this, along with Koyu, because they just wanted rid of all of them. So those guys ended up getting much, much longer prison sentences. And there was terrible outcomes for them. John Nicol died in Dortmund in February 1945. Clifford Koyu also, unfortunately, he died as well I think it was 1944 that he died. No, he was taken away from Jersey in July 43. He was brought back briefly, but due to ill health, they then took him away again because they just to reinforce the fact they actually wanted rid of this poor man. They took him away again. He died in September 1944. So, and Tierney, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He almost survived the war. He sadly died probably, we think, the 4th of May 1945. But all of these people went through a whole raft of prisons and ended up in forced labour camps, police prisons, all over they got absolutely terrible treatment, which is why so many of them died, because that's four of them out of 16. That's absolutely awful.
Yes. Is this sort of a case that would sort of be known to people in Jersey? I mean, it's quite a big...
Yeah, it would be.
It would live in folk memory still.
Yeah, absolutely. And these people are commemorated as well on memorial and whatever. I mean, the Germans then went on to publish in the Jersey Evening Post about these heavy punishments, and you must stop listening to the BBC, and this is what will happen to you. Did it make any difference? Did it, heck?
Yeah.
People became more careful about what they were doing.
And probably resolved to carry on as well.
Yeah. And the Germans even, the Germans admitted that some of these people were very elderly, but they basically didn't care. There was only 2 exceptions to that, 2 elderly female women who had, and I find this a very odd sentence, their sentence was held over until the end of the war, provided they do not commit any further culpable action. So,
yeah, I think they were just sort of a bland end to that, and those 2 ladies probably frightened out of their wits. Nevertheless, I'm sure they must have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we mentioned before, once you'd come to the attention of them, your name was marked, which is unfortunately what happened to a number of these.
Okay, moving on. I think we're staying in Jersey here. This is an item that we're going to just focus in on about the constables here, given the powers to the parish officials, parish constables, given the powers to act under the civil liberties law, enable them to guard property from Russians that are on the island now. These are not Russian troops, Nick. These are Russian slave workers, or both?
Yeah, Russian slave workers that are basically either being, again, we kind of touched on this last month, either being encouraged to go and steal food so the Germans don't have to feel that, don't have to give them even the meagre rations that they do give them, or, are just choosing to go and do that because they are so very hungry and so badly treated. Lesotho had put a diary entry in a little bit earlier in the month where they were talking about calling up men to do work, and he said he quite rightly noted that this was possibly what the outcome was going to be, and that was proved true. I mean, he was a bit worried because the Germans were very jumpy, and we didn't get around to mentioning it in the March 43 episode, but they actually had a 3-day period where they had an exercise basically around what would happen if there had been a landing by the British on Jersey, and it involved lots of rules and regulations about people having to stay at home and stuff like that. And people, if you were working at the power station or somewhere like that, you weren't allowed to come off your shift. Basically, you had to keep going. The Germans would not give them a permit to change over the staff in the case of an emergency.
Yeah.
Which ties into this next bit that I found, which was basically the bailiff of Jersey, obviously coming off the back of this exercise that the Germans had. The bailiff of Jersey had written to the Germans, to Field Commandante 515, and basically said, can we have some permits for the telephone officials? In the case of if there was an emergency, because that's what they called it, not an invasion or anything like that. In the event of an emergency, a bit like Putin and his special operation, not a war. It's clearly propaganda that they're using that terminology. They just don't want to admit that they might get invaded. by the British trying to take them out of the island. So he gets a fairly terse note back basically saying the application of the issue of 8 permits for the employees of the local telephone services cannot be granted, as in the event of fighting, the local telephone service will be shut down and the exchange occupied by the forces. And that's one of the first things actually I've seen that's signed for von Asvas as I can never pronounce it, as field commandant of 515 in Jersey.
So what they're basically saying is the military would take over, and the staff presumably would just be held there.
Yeah, and your phone service isn't going to be running anyway because we're going to use it.
Yes, in the event of fighting, I mean, it's a sort of bland, but if there was fighting over here.
Well, the problem, the reason that they really didn't want to issue permits, it kind of backfires because we mentioned, I can't remember if it was in the March episode or February episode, that the Jersey ARP were basically going around making notes. They were taking advantage of the fact that they had permits to be out and about, and they could go into certain areas where others perhaps couldn't. And they were basically making notes which were then being gathered up, ready to be shipped off when people escaped.
Yeah, they had a license to roam, really, didn't they? So
the Germans were onto the right thing with the let's not give people permits, but from that perspective, but they completely missed that the ARP, who they were allowing out, were doing that. So, but their concern was that, having said that, they said in the event of an emergency that the ARP and the police, etc., or whatever, were all to stay indoors, because they just basically, quite rightly, thought that those sort of people would be the ones on the ground who would be, some British troops turn up, they'd be going, yeah, you want to go that way?
Yeah.
Don't go that way. There's a whole load of Germans there, but you can nip round the back, if you go up this road here, and then you can ambush them from behind or whatever. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm quite intrigued with this, that you've turned up here from the 14th of April, 1943, notice to women. And the reason why that piques my interest is that I gave a talk this week about my family in wartime, and my great aunt had moved from the south of the island to the north in this time in 1943. And I wonder why she had moved from this sort of cottage in St. Martin's up to an area just north of St. Peter Port, because she went to work in the greenhouse industry, and she was working for Dorry at Belgrave Vineries. So this would be an area just north of St. Peter Port. And this, I think, Nick, sort of answers it here. That this is basically, women are asked to go and growers and farmers are urged to make the greatest use possible of female labour in order to keep ahead of their work as much as possible. So she I think, would practically have been moved and away from family property to the north, drafted in as labour supply.
Yeah, they were basically called up to go and do that, and it was partly also that this was the Guernsey Labour Office, but they were forced to do this. And so you had women coming to help with the cultivation of crops, but women were also being made to go and take on jobs that would normally have been done by men.
Yep. To
free up Germans from more mundane tasks such as horse and cart,
and digging holes
and stuff like that. But Lesotho was quite disparaging in Jersey about this, because one of the things is that the wages that are paid are much higher, which now obviously gives you access to the black market, or better access to the black market. But also Lesotho says, yeah, the women seem quite keen to get closer to the green fly, as he calls the Germans.
Yeah.
The uniforms. And whether that's true or not, it's probably more around the money. Who knows? It may not have been just that.
Yeah, so this, just for Guernsey people, this notice to women that was placed in the local paper is signed off by R.H. Johns, the Labour officer. And that's R.H. Johns, the butcher on the bridge, which is, his name is still there in marble on this wonderful storefront. And he was literally the butcher on the bridge, and he was a politician, and he was a Labour officer here. Okay, rations reduced, Germans blame British. This appears in Jersey and in Guernsey, Nick.
Yeah, we've got a whole load of stuff going on here. So basically, the Germans got a bit miffed because, well, for various reasons, They were already reducing rations in France, so that their excuse is no excuse. But they published a notice basically saying, wherever German forces have occupied, we've safeguarded supplies of foodstuffs and essential commodities for the civilian population. To this, the British Channel Isles are no exception. But then they go on to blame, basically, the British are stopping you from getting your supplies because they keep bombing all your food convoys and stuff like that. We'll come back to food convoys being bombed later on and whether that's true or not. And they blame Mr. Churchill and the men behind him will not achieve any military results from their nuisance raids and whatever. So basically they go on about, and they make it's all a construct, come up with why they're going to reduce rations in the Channel Islands, but we'll come to that in a minute. But I mean, we were already struggling. Gilmet, you picked up, Gilmet was talking about insulin, massive problem. We know that sadly people did die, diabetics did die because they couldn't get insulin during the course of the occupation, or certainly not enough, rather, to keep everybody supplied. Supplies had initially been coming from Germany, but they were frantically seeking them in France, but it wasn't really going very well.
No, and what I was going to go on to say again, this is where Coutances and Jersey applies some leadership here, which I think was lacking in Guernsey. But Coutances here actually writes to the International Red Cross requesting 100,000 units of insulin. So he's not sitting on his hands, and presumably he would have asked the permission of the Germans to approach the International Red Cross, but he got on and did it.
Well, whether that letter actually got there is another matter, but, who knows? Some of them went missing for various reasons. The Germans would blame, again, the bombing raids and things like that, that perhaps things didn't get through, but there's evidence that some of them, in some cases, that they withheld stuff like that. Now, part of this is also potentially because of some resistance activity in France that is causing problems as well. You've got various reports that you found about poisonous chocolate-pierced tuna fish tins.
Yeah. Aude and Violet Carey, two of our diarists, hear about the fact that chocolate sourced from France is found to contain arsenic, and several Germans are said to have died as a result of this, and others are ill. And of course, the Germans have apparently been handing small pieces of chocolate out to the children on both islands, and the children were becoming ill, and this wasn't done deliberately. The Germans had no idea that this chocolate had been tampered with, and it is said that 3 tons had to be destroyed, and then also tins of tuna apparently were condemned after it was found that they'd have been pierced. So they must have started to smell, I would have thought. Yeah,
you would have thought so, although given that it didn't have so much in the way of soap, etc.
Yeah.
probably just mixed in with some of the other smells. But there's more and more, Ambrose Robin records in his diary that there's more and more evidence of sabotage in France. And this again might be partly what's driving the issue. New engines for lorries and cars were arriving with holes bored in pistons and cylinder walls, and it wasn't until they were fitted that they were found to have been sabotaged. And he again talks about chocolate for the troops having been poisoned. But the Germans, as they try and blame the British, and in bold type at the bottom of the notice they put, the population of the islands, however, may at least know the culprits, after their very big long rant about who was responsible for the lack of food. Mollett says it's just a reprisal against the population, again, presumably for radios, but rations were also being cut in France. So there were strong representations made about what was going to be cut. I mean, they were already hinting that it was going to be 20% off the bread ration.
Yeah, so these items that have been tampered with, I think this is like sabotage in France, not because these items are coming to the Channel Islands.
No, this is general.
This is general sabotage in the French mainland, and these items just happened to be sent to the Channel Islands.
It wasn't. I mean, I can think of a case of 2 Frenchmen who ironically ended up in Alderney in a prisoner of war camp, and what their crime was that they were two French plumbers and they'd sabotaged some large washing machines which were intended for use by the Germans in Alderney. And whoever sentenced them obviously decided that they were going up there instead of the washing machines.
At the scene of the crime.
Yeah, well, because they sabotaged them at St Malo Dock before they got sent up there.
Ah. Okay, April the 28th, 1943, saw another spasm of air activity. And this is planes descending on a convoy approaching from Granville. So these ships, or the convoy, Nick, is actually coming to the Channel Islands with supplies from Granville, and they're attacked. Is this an opportunistic raid, or do you think it had been sort of pre-planned?
No, this is pre-planned. So there were various squadrons that spent a lot of time going up and down between here and the French coast, specifically looking for targets in terms of convoys. Also, returning aircraft were reporting sightings of these. So you get the likes of, let me just get notes here, 263 Squadron, who we talked about a couple of times in the last few episodes. They flew Whirlwinds and Whirly bombers, so the bombing version of the Whirlwind from Dorset, from RAF Warnwell. Their squadron had the curious name of the Fellowship of the Bellows. They were often escorted, again, by 616 Squadron, who saw quite a bit of action around here. They were flying from Ibsley, which is a base near Ringwood, and they were the South Yorkshire Squadron, and 504 Squadron, also based at the same place, at County of Nottingham. Now, these Spitfire pilots often undertook recce flights to go and look to see if there were any convoys, and then the Whirly bombers would be escorted by them. Now, Reinhold, old Ord's German friend, who was stationed, I think you found at the Vale Castle, wasn't he?
No, Vale Mill.
Vale Mill, top of the Vale Mill. Now, I've got a photo of the Vale Mill taken just after the war, which very kindly a gentleman who listens to the show and also reads my blog sent me. So I will share that, because I've not actually seen one of it exactly as it was at the end of the war, because it started to deteriorate and 2 floors were taken off it, I think in the late 50s, early 60s, because it was becoming dangerous. But anyway, he says he had a great view of this raid from up there, which I guess, given the number of aircraft that appear to have been involved, then that would kind of make sense, even though the ships would have been around the other side of Jersey from here, because they were going to St Helier and they were in St Albans Bay. But there were a number of ships that were sunk. One of them was carrying coal for Guernsey, and apparently one sank in the harbour. Now, I haven't got a note of the one that sank in the harbour, but there was the SS Mars, which was... Oh, sorry, that was the one that sank in the harbour. I'll check my notes. And they badly damaged a couple of other minesweepers as well that were going along with these. But the Helmer as well was another boat, which was a sort of schooner, motor schooner that the Germans had taken from the Dutch, I think. Yeah. Oh, no, that was a German one. Sorry, I'll get that right. That was originally a German one that had come all the way from Hamburg, was a motor schooner. It was the Mars that had come from Holland. So they'd got sunk, but I'm not surprised, because 263 Squadron with their Whirly bombers, I mean, they've got a 420mm cannon on the front, which is going to ruin your day, but then obviously they're dropping bombs as well. Reading the squadron report, they talk about setting off at sea level towards Jersey, where they found the convoy of 9 ships, and then they talk about leaving a couple flaming, and also seriously damaging on trawlers and minesweepers. And they talk about bombing a conventional yacht, but I'm presuming that was the schooner that we were just talking about, the Helmer, and that they probably sunk it. They also say they went on to damage an E-boat with cannon fire during the course of that operation, and they thought they'd probably sunk a motor barge. They give a reasonably detailed reports. Then you get reports from 616. There's one of the Spitfire squadrons about what they got up to, and likewise 504, where they give very similar reports to what was mentioned by the original squadron report I was mentioning there, but they talk about the U-boat being damaged, left damaged and smoking and probably sinking as well. Now, I've looked at the ops record for 263 Squadron. They spent basically over a year, just predominantly raiding shipping around the Channel Islands from sort of late 42 onwards. So they were in the air around here an awful lot. They also had some really interesting write-ups about some of the days when they were flying, when they weren't necessarily coming to Guernsey. There's one report where it says an interesting and very bad day for the squadron, and they talk about one guy cartwheeling his plane down the runway because he tried to land in a 50-mile-an-hour crosswind, but surviving. He wasn't minimal injuries by the sounds of it, back flying the next day. Another one who took the wingtip off of this aircraft. So, yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things Nick mentioned, Vale Mill and Reinhardt being able to see what was going on the other side of Jersey. It should be said that Vale Mill is you'll tweet the picture, Nick.
Yeah, I'll tweet
it was a mill, and it's right on the top of a hill. And if you were to walk out the studio door here now, walk about 8 yards, you'll be able to see it quite clearly.
Oh yeah, you're very much.
And it's recently been renovated, and it's quite a luxury home now.
Yeah, it is. It is
with buildings there's a quarry underneath that's full of water. It's got a boat, and it's a really quite curious building. And so I think when you see the picture, you're going to put it on your blog and
I'll
tweet it?
Yeah, I'll put it on our Facebook page as well, and I'll put a link to both of those in the show notes. But when you think there were 6 Whirly bombers involved in the raid, and then you've got 6. Yeah, you've got about 12 Spitfires escorting them. So that's going to be quite visible from the top of the Vale Mill here, even though they wouldn't have been able to see the ships that were being bombed.
But the air activity must have been spectacular.
The air activity, I'd imagine quite a lot of smoke, from bombing those.
You couldn't have had a better and safer view, I think. An earlier raid, this is something that our diarists talk about, and this and the next item we're going to discuss, I think really bear more research, Nick. The so-called sinking of the Rosalie. Reverend Ord comments on the sinking of the Rosalie and says he understands that all the German troops on board drowned. Now, you can't find anything on that. So
no, I can't find anything on the Rosalie, full stop. I can't find a ship called that or anything, so I don't know if they've got the name wrong. I've tried searching for various different ones. I can't find anything. It's not in the logs of ships lost here.
And the German, so-called German, or the alleged German dead don't appear in the list of dead here, but they wouldn't anyway, presumably, if it was out.
Exactly. So, yeah, who knows? But also, just going back to the thing about rationing and a lot of these, raids, the Germans were blaming it for stopping the food ships, but a lot of the ships that are being attacked, coal, cement, it's not stuff you're going to eat, nor your essential supplies.
No.
Now, inevitably, food ships were sunk as part of these raids, but certainly in this case, it wasn't that. And another thing that Robin noted was that the Germans blamed all of this activity, saying that the RAF had mined outside of St. Petersburg Harbour at the end of April, and that's why no ships had come in with any food for days. He wrote this on a Tuesday, and they said they'd mined them on Thursday, and no food ships had been in since Thursday. And Robin basically goes, "Yeah, who are you trying to kid? I've seen all the other ships coming in and out with cement and everything else.
Yeah.
If it's not safe for the food ships to come in and out, how come that's going on?" So yeah, the Rosalie's a bit of a mystery actually to me. I must have a look into that one and see if I can find any more. But I did have a good dig, but it was a struggle.
Okay, another item here, again from Ord. He hears of German troops travelling by bus come to grief and there were many casualties. And he comments that at this rate, the German so-called hero cemetery will be full up at this rate. He hears of a piece of land out in the country that has been taken over for this purpose. Now, before we got together to record this morning, we sort of said, well, we've got nothing on this. But talking amongst the two of us, we think this might be, local people would know that this might be the formation of the cemetery out in the Cherbourg Peninsula. The time frame seems to fit, and we can continue to research on that one. So you're probably aware, if you're a long-term listener, that items do come up which we haven't got an empirical answer to, and we continue to research. And it's important when diaries and letters come to light, because often the slightest comment can solve these sort of unsolved items.
Yeah, although don't go marching up and down Cherbourg Road looking for the cemetery, because it's not there anymore.
No, well, that's right. In fact, if all of the people that were buried there were taken over to France.
And reinterred in France, yeah.
This next item, a slight item, but it was a coincidence. One of Nick and I's fellow guides, Dave, contacted me and wanted to know if we knew anything about German soldiers or German military that may have been artists. And lo and behold, in complete coincidence, Nick sends me this. He didn't know about it. A piece in the local paper: art exhibits of German soldiers on view in St. Peter Port. So, Dave, by the time you hear this, we'll have sent you the information for you to just have a look at. And so, what a strange thing for that to come up. So, it seems that there were some accomplished artists over here amongst the German military, and another one, German Soldiers Art Exhibition. So, covered that, and it says here it's badly reproduced because the paper and the printing was poor at the time, but the view of the eastern coastline of Guernsey from St. Martin's Point. So they were out and about. It
was quite a sizable exhibition as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
The irony of this, of course, is it was absolutely forbidden for the civilian population to go outside and do any sort of drawing or painting whatsoever. But they had 70 works of art were on display in Le Cheminon's photographers in the arcade, presumably because Mr. Le Cheminon was not in the photography business anymore due to them being banned. And I think it was Grutz were the only one that were producing photographs, and they were being made to do that by the Germans. So your average civilian could get permission for indoor photographs or special things like weddings and stuff like that. But other than that, you were scuppered. But they took about 70 pictures there, and it being a very popular pastime of the German forces, portraying the scenes in Guernsey and Sark, and their work had been attracting much attention among their officers and comrades, exhibited in 2 rooms at the OGH as well.
Yeah, the OGH being the old government hotel, so which people may well have stayed in. It's in the heart of St. Peter Port.
They've got a room there, actually, which has got a meeting room, which has got loads of photographs, and from the occupation time and pre-occupation as well. It's like the history of the hotel. Really interesting, actually. If you do go there, it's worth asking them if you can. Yeah, have a look. But there were a whole selection of these works of art. In fact, we've got a bit of a list going on here. Sark, the south coast, a poetic yet powerfully drawn fantasy. Sentinels along the coast, apparently it was called. And then there's St. James's Church, seen from several different angles. I'd imagine one of those angles might well have been the OGH, because they'll have been sat on the balcony at the OGH there, potentially outside the old office there, doing that. And it talks about Beauregard, Lee Creutz, Herm from Beauregard Lane, various other places. They'd clearly been doing a lot of drawing. This was obviously just another. It
makes it sound as if you couldn't walk around St. Peter Port without tripping over a German with a canvas on an easel.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it, doesn't it?
Okay, moving on. Red Cross offenders. Nick, this is an interesting one. What have you got on this?
Yeah, so this is quite a good one. And this coincides with something I was told the other day, actually, although I can't remember who told me this. And it's in the last week or so. It might have been when I was in London on Friday. The Red Cross offenders were basically people who had been relocated. They'd been made to move by the Germans, but they were using both addresses so that they could send 2 lots of Red Cross letters a month instead of 1. Now, I was saying, this is basically saying, look, pack it in, we're on to you. If we become suspicious, we'll trace the senders to ascertain if the messages are being sent independently or if not, one of them will be confiscated. I don't know how they'll pick which one. The conversation I had during the week was somebody was telling me that their family had a young child, I think about 2 years old at the start of the occupation, who they very craftily registered to be able to send Red Cross letters. So they were then able to send 2 a month because of that.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a sleight of hand going on. Necessity being the mother of invention, people were coming up with various different ruses to work to their advantage, and who can blame them?
Yeah, absolutely. And there were all sorts of various wheezes like that. I mean, that wasn't doing any harm to anybody, apart from annoying the Germans present. But it would have been a bit of a pain in the neck for the Red Cross office, because that was staffed by civilians from here. But it would give the censor a bit more work to do, because it had to censor a few more things.
Okay, we have now another notice in the local paper. This is in Guernsey, about a prohibited zone for people that are aware of Guernsey locations. This prohibited zone covered the area at Port Gras at the Pickerel, from the middle of Lille Common to Rousse and to the beach north of Bordeaux Harbour. People are hereby notified it is no longer permitted to enter those beaches. Permits which have been renewed have been altered accordingly. So this is really, they're changing. What they laying minefields here, Nick?
No, I think it's just they're stopping access to the beach. There were minefields at Bordeaux along the Haiti around that way, but I think it's just they were stopping access. There have been escapes from Bordeaux, for example, and Port Gras. They had various fortifications around there. I think that's probably just the Rousse Headland we talked earlier on about. They had a minefield there quite early on, and the German that managed to blow himself up by going to check on the minefield when his platoon were not there. Okay,
Ord again hears of a German that had visited his home. And I should remind listeners that Ord, he was a clergyman, but he was a fluent German speaker, and several Germans felt that they could share news with him in confidence. And he hears of a German that had visited his home in Stuttgart and told the people that he was billeted, so this is the German returning to Guernsey and talking to the people that he lived with effectively, that his home in Germany was a shambles, and he wonders, why should this war go on? The longer it does, the less we have left. If we have to hold on much longer, there will be nothing all to return to. And this, of course, German troops being absolutely shocked by the devastation that the Allies had caused in France, and then travelling up into Germany.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a recurring theme, that some of them weren't even able to get back to Germany on leave by this point in time, because the railways across France were being bombed. German railways were being bombed, so it was too difficult for them to actually make it back. They wouldn't make it back in time before they'd turn around and start trying to get back here. You found another one as well, Ord's acquaintance, Reinhold, who our man from the Vale Mill. He confides in Ord that actually, where they'd been talking about people being arrested and things, and he confides in Ord that actually, when he was back in Germany, he'd been arrested when the Gestapo had intercepted letters he'd written to a Czech friend, where he was in prison for 18 months. Now, I've read the account of this, and it's actually quite horrible what they did to him. We won't go into it on air, but if you do particularly want to find out what happens to him, go and have a look at Ord's diary. But yeah, he was particularly badly treated. So it's quite surprising that he's ended up in the position that he's in here in Guernsey.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show many of the German officers, especially, were only too aware of the denial of human rights, but what could happen to people in a totalitarian state. A message for us at the moment, of course. Artillery, ARP Warden report on Guernsey. This is really good stuff.
Yeah, so we talked about the artillery practice, etc. last month. Been going on, and the fact that they'd been firing over St. Peter Port and various bits had to be evacuated and whatever. Now, the ARP here were at various points either the ARP or they were stood down from that and were given other jobs to do. Nevertheless, they kept a log One of the things that they kept in their log was damage reported to buildings, either by air raids or, in this case, when this would have been when Mirus was discharged on Monday the 12th of April. And basically, somebody had rung up the constables in St. Peter's and said, I've had damage caused by the Germans firing their guns. There was a premature burst of a shell on this occasion. I'm assuming this is Mirus. It could have been one of the other ones from around there, but the way it reads, I think it is Mirus. And this was a relatively new build house, which had been badly damaged. It was a 4-room bungalow, slate roofed, and the roof was holed in many places. All the glass, about 878 panes of glass had been blown out of the greenhouses. It caused an awful lot of damage to the property. It's quite a long report. I'll share that on our Facebook and Twitter as well, and I'll put links to that. But there's another interesting link to this that crops up, which is, as I say, we talked about them firing over town and stuff. Well, Robin records on the 18th of April that there was a report circulating that a bomb was dropped on Castle Cornet shortly after 10 a.m. Now, bearing in mind that was used by the Germans, anti-aircraft guns there and all sorts of stuff, and the Germans had received sudden orders to leave from there. It was later transpired that it was in fact a shell from a field gun at the Coathills, which had dropped short. Rumours are circulating today. Most of the troops, OTs and labourers, are to leave the island before the 28th. That was a rumour that was going around the islands as well. But yeah, so they managed to shell their own men. Well done, you. I mean, it could actually. There were a few guns up there. It might well have been at Blue Mountains. They had a field gun up there which pointed pretty much in the direction of Castle Cornet. So could well have been one of those, or from actually on the Coathills itself, I guess.
Yes, because Castle Cornet, I think, was the only British castle attacked by the RAF.
Yes, it was
in history,
albeit not in this case, but yeah, it's the only British castle that's been bombed by the RAF, or as far as we're aware, anyway. Unless I can't imagine they've deliberately gone and bombed any other British castles.
No. Okay, now we have an account here of the Wellington bomber from 431 Squadron. Fatalities. It went down by Jersey, and you've got quite a stark photograph there of the cemetery, and also there was people were prevented to enter the cemetery. Nick, you've got quite a lot on this.
Yeah, it was the only one of the crew that was killed was Flight Sergeant Bidmead. It was a Wellington bomber HE-213 which had taken off from RAF Burn in Yorkshire, and it had been on a raid to Frankfurt. Coming back, they'd somehow found themselves near Jersey, to the south of Jersey, where they'd been attacked. They ditched roughly 3 miles southwest of Jersey after they'd put out a call. Now, the Germans didn't hang about because, this took place on the night of the 10th to the 11th. And Ralph Mollett in Jersey notes on the 13th that 3 airmen left the island on a hospital ship for St. Malo at 7:30. So, 2 days and they're off. But the funeral, there was also Sergeant Holden was washed up in Queen's Bay. St. Juan's Bay. It says St. Queen's, I don't know why. It's in Jersey on the 3rd of June, and his body and the body of another flight sergeant was later rescued with full military honours. We've got some photographs that I can send you. I can put those out as well as a link. You can go and have a look. It's quite unusual seeing the German pallbearers and a Union Jack over the coffin, as well as the wreaths, etc., being laid. But it was a full military funeral for him, together with the crew member from the Halifax DG 408, and the wreaths were laid by the German Air Force, the Bailiff of Jersey. There were so many other wreaths that were delivered on behalf of the population, and they required 2 large lorries to deliver them. And although the public had been banned from attending the funeral, later in the day, thousands of islanders filed past. We've got another one which has proved a bit of a mystery to us as well, which is some 19 escaping Frenchmen.
Yes, both Ord and Guillemette, two very well-placed diarists, comment on this. 19 Frenchmen arriving in Guernsey having tried to escape from the French mainland. Both of them fear for the men after they had been captured. But we're not turning anything up at all, Nick.
No, absolutely diddly squat on this, other than I found that Robin had recorded it in his diary as well, and similar concerns about basically they'll be shipped straight off back to France and Lord knows what happened. Now, the context for this, of course, is earlier on in the occupation, some Frenchmen had arrived in Guernsey, had thought that they were in the Isle of Wight, came at the beach singing the Marseillaise, etc., and then, unfortunately for them, discovered that they were in fact in occupied Guernsey. Francois Scornet was taken, along with others, were taken to Jersey. Unfortunately for Scornet, he was sentenced to death and shot in Jersey. But I can't find anything else about these guys at the moment. I will keep looking.
Okay, the man who wouldn't sign. So this is a tale of a local man that the Germans had called up to do some manual work, to dig some holes or some trenches. His employers, the manager from his employer, sought for exemption on the basis that the firm had a shortage of labour. The Germans weren't going to listen to this, and they called the man into the commandant to give him a description of what he had to do, and the man was given a paper to sign. The paper was in German, and the man simply refused to sign as he couldn't read it, didn't know what he was signing. And it says, after some time and with some exasperation on the part of the Germans, the man was shown the door and never heard anything about it again. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one because there's also accounts. Robin talks about the fact that they were calling up people from local employment, and they don't appear to have thought about what they're doing with them. So they might be gainfully employed. Robin talks about bank managers, people like that, who are then being apparently sent off to do manual labour by the Germans. And Robin talks about one crowd of 11 or 12 who were selected merely on the basis that they had bicycles, and that they were going to go and work at the airport. So they were sent there, 8 a.m. The officer in charge had nothing for them to do. So he had a quick conflab on the telephone with headquarters, and he was told to send them to Les Îles, St. Peter's. Same performance there. Sent on to the Naftio after that, then to Bobigny. I mean, we're not talking places that are close together here, are we? Let's be frank. You're being sent to the north of the island.
Hither and thither.
So from the furthest southwest to up onto to the north of the island, and then to Norman Stores at the Ramay, just for good measure. Although by the time they got, they must have been knackered anyway.
Yeah, just cycling, crisscrossing. I can imagine there might have been a little bit of humour to start with, a bit of banter, but the day out, really.
Probably wore pretty thin, I should think. Yeah. Bear in mind that the people were short on rations and not doing so good. But when they got to the Ramay, they basically persuaded the officer in charge, look, don't phone in and find out what to do with us. It's basically clock us off. It's the end of the day, which he actually did. And again, this talks about the fact that there was higher wages to be had if you would go and work for the Germans. It was causing problems for civilian authorities. It also, just as a throwaway comment, mentions in there, there's absolutely no string to tie up tomatoes, which is a bit of a problem.
Yes, the infrastructure is really under quite a bit of strain by now, of course, and at least we're moving from, in 1943, we're moving from April into May, and hopefully people's fortunes may be a little bit better in the summertime. I think that brings us pretty much to the end of this episode, apart from our usual goodbyes and rounds up. We've had an email from Mr. Romwell in Jersey.
Yep.
I think Nick has replied to you. I'm so sorry.
He doesn't live in Jersey now, but he is a Jerseyman originally.
So thank you for bearing with us. I missed the communication come in, but we've tightened that up now. So I think Nick has, you've communicated with him, Nick.
I have.
Nick has been to London talking recently and met a number of you listeners. Nick will be talking in 2 weeks yesterday in London, the Imperial War Museum.
I'm taking part in the podcast live festival at the Imperial War Museum in London. There are only a handful of tickets left now, I understand. And I'm going to be talking to their head of public history at the IWM, a chap called James Bolgin, who is a really, really interesting guy for a multitude of reasons. And he has written a very good book about the Holocaust. And he also curated their 2 permanent galleries at the museum.
And this is being recorded, Nick, isn't it?
It is. It's being recorded. We'll be putting it out on the 3rd of November. I've roped in one of our regular listeners and guest on the show, Kerry Thomas.
No pressure, Kerry.
Yeah, to come and assist, because you're off gallivanting somewhere else doing something we're not allowed to talk about at the moment. No,
it's suffice to say it was quite an honour to be asked to view an archive from a person that was a regular diarist and journal keeper. They are a whole slab of journals that take in the war years. The person was here and was married to quite a prominent person over here. So giving advice on that, and probably seeking advice from Nick also. So it's quite an exciting. I've been trying to trace these journals for some time, and they've been lodged in Cambridge University. So I'll be looking at those, and so I'll be looking forward to hearing Nick as a result of that. And hopefully I'll be able to report on this archive in due course. And what else have we got, Nick? Have you got any tours on at the moment?
No tours at the moment. But yeah. I am working up to. I'll be doing my silver when that starts, my silver course. But I'm looking at a couple of things going forward for tours for next year. Whilst we're talking about tours, Simon Delarue, who's a fellow tour guide and listener to the podcast, has come up with a suggestion. We had a bit of a mystery with Reinhold and Ord were talking about a ship, and we couldn't, and bodies being washed up and things, and we couldn't work out which one it was. Ever on the ball, Simon's come up with, he thinks it might be HMT Lord Hailsham.
So this is a communication that's come in while we've been recording?
No, this came in. This came in earlier in the week, but I hadn't jotted it on the show notes. I meant to include it. It was an armed trawler of 445 tons. And that the Lord Hailsham was sunk in Lyme Bay by German E-boats, but the bodies were washed up here potentially.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I do intend to take some talks over the winter period, details of which will go up on my website, Guernsey Walking Tours, www.guernseywalkingtours.com. And I undertook the first of my historical talks here. It was well attended at St Martin's Parish Hall. The subject was my family in wartime, and the next talk will be at 7 p.m. on the 11th of November, and the subject will be my grandfather's service in the Royal Navy, and it will span from just after the First World War. He took part in Operation Red Takes in China Station, Spanish Civil War, and also his presence at the Battle of Narvik and his torpedoing in the Med. And he led quite a life.
Indeed, quite a life. I'm sure there'll be a good turnout for that one. We've had a spate of, or rather, I've had a spate of people get in touch with me off the back of my blog as well with photos. Some of them are listeners to the podcast as well, but I've had some cracking photos through that have come either via the blog or via my social media. People have got in touch with me from as far away as America, things like that, but with some photographs and stuff, which I'm just working through at the moment in terms of identifying. Well, one is a gentleman who very kindly sent me some photographs of his grandfather when he was based here during the occupation. So we're just trying to work out some of the locations and things on that. I think a couple of them might be in Jersey, but there is the inevitable little chapel photo.
Yes, always. We would be suspicious if we had some photographs that didn't include the little chapel.
And again, I've had another chap who listens to the show get in touch with me about something else, and very kindly gave me some photos to look at, which includes that Vale Mill one that I'll be sharing later.
Okay. Thank you ever so much for getting in touch with us. Thank you for your support. I think support is growing. We get a wonderful response to these podcasts. So May 1943 next. And as always, if you wish to contact us, you can get us at occupied@gnetradio.com. And I think we will say our our goodbyes.
Yeah, I think that's it for now. And yeah, you stand by for the special that will be coming out next, which will be out on the 3rd of November, which will be the interview from the IWM. Hot off the press, because I've only done it on the 1st of November on the Saturday. So I'll give me something to do while I'm travelling back.
Yeah. Okay.
Sit there and edit the show. So anyway, that's us for now. And it's goodbye from me, Nick Lahire, and goodbye from
Keith Bengelli. And we'll be back with you soon with May 1943. Goodbye.
He looked to the heavens when he heard the engines hum. A sky full of planes and each one with a bomb. And they're gonna wanna drop them on someone. It's 5 to 7. All his friends and family had gone.